Thanks for moving back. We're at the last one at part one. This guy is spam calling me. Just
What about
good time. Yeah. Anyway, so thanks for coming back this week. You weren't here last week. I will be sending out slides and a recording link for both events probably tomorrow morning. Okay, so that everybody has it. Should be by the afternoon. I got some meetings in the morning, but I'll try to get those out to you all as soon as possible. So no questions on it. I will be sending out slides. Okay, so it's a running joke. My name is Jim Mason Brink. I am the program director of the AFRL Small Business Hub, the Wright Brothers Institute. You are currently in the Wright Brothers Institute facility. This is where I have all my flyers and stuff. I've never been to one before. How about I got 7 colliders scheduled this quarter, so if you've never been on my list before, you'll be getting those invitations here pretty soon for the remainder of the ones this quarter and then following, obviously. So would love to have you guys attend those also. Today's speakers are Mandy Thompson from JJR Solutions. This one lady, I'm repping my JJR and socks today. Everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you guys doing this. I mean, that does, you know, for a small business to do this, present, it's a lot for them. You know, they take their time. Mandy made slides and everything. I got them last night at 10:30 p.m. at night. So yeah, she's wasn't that like 10:30?
Well, what you're saying is that I was like last second.
That's okay, but I say, I'm just telling you, I appreciate all the hard work.
Yes.
And then online, we have Jessica Johnson with Red River. She'll be supporting Mandy with her presentation. I don't know whether you're gonna go over her bio, right?
Yep.
Your slides. And then also Joel Krock, who will be doing the pricing section, okay? So all good stuff. I'm glad to see good crowd here. I think we've got about 71 line right now, maybe. But I know the ticker, I know the ticker was going up as was coming up here. Also, we have a local Apex Accelerator gentleman in the back, Rob Bonderon. He's here. If you're not familiar with your Apex Accelerator and you're thinking about working for the federal government, Rob is the guy to get a hold of. We've also had some new collateral material, so you need to get this one contact information or know what the Apex Accelerator is all about. You got some new collateral material, or excuse me, collateral. One of the always fun conversations around here, and everybody's been to a collider knows what I'm going to say next is parking. Was everybody good with their parking spot? Okay, yeah, there's plenty of parking today, so it should be okay. Don't want anybody get in trouble. For the online participants, I would appreciate if you would use the Q&A for your questions. Okay, do not use the chat because that just gets out of control way too fast. And we have a person here, Rich Green, who is going to be monitoring the Q&A online. And Rich has got a great background in this proposal writing. I mean, he was a speaker last week on the 101. So he'll probably answer them on the fly. I don't have to ask her. And as far as questions, this is an open forum. This is all about collaboration. So please, if you have a question for Mandy or any of the other people online, our presenters online, please speak up, raise your hand. Another thing is, if you weren't here last week, I mentioned that all the microphones that you see in the ceiling they're hot. They're always hot, meaning they're always on. So if you're talking to somebody in the back, they can hear you, okay? So it's just a warning. That's some bad things. That's okay. And then after, everybody probably knows this already, you always try to have a little network event after the event. At the big beer company, that's optional, no pressure. There will also be an APSIA Big Right chapter, tagging on to my networking, which is really great. Yeah, Million back, she started that. So, yeah. And that is it. And get started.
Thank you. Okay. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here, being online. You know, I'm always, I will say, like, I always get just a smidge nervous before I come up here. But it's really because I want to make sure I'm giving you guys the best content that I can, using my experience and things, lessons that I have learned. As you can see up here, so for the last 5 years, I have been at JGR Solutions. And last year was promoted to VP. And in that role, so I still do contracts, I do pricing, also the FSO, as many people are probably familiar. If you have a small business, you have lots of folks who wear several different hats, and so that's the case. But in many ways, a lot of those things all kind of seem to go hand in hand in terms of being able to answer questions and figure things out. My past experience, so before JDR, I spent about 3 years at the National Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in Pasadena, California, as a senior subcontracts manager. If you know anything about JPL, they're an FFRDC, and so they're run by Caltech. My employer was Caltech, and so that's why we're subcontracts managers there, because NASA gives them essentially a gigantic private contract. So there did a lot of really neat acquisitions for spacecraft. My mission was the one that it's going to launch later this year to go explore Jupiter to Europa. Learn a lot of things, a lot of problem solving has to go into a program that massive because you get one try, you know, to do this. So it's gotta be right. The other experience that I have is working just over the base at Red Hat. That's where I started my career in contracts. Worked there about 7 years before I moved over to NASA, spent time in aircraft, IT systems, and as well as a 2-year stint as a pricer. So working those really big efforts supporting LCMC. You know, with all the programs that I supported, whether it was systems, subsystems, you get all of the problems that you have to solve and you have to do them so quickly because it just felt like you're perpetually behind. You guys probably, and actually maybe real quick, just get an idea, how many of you guys are industry? Maybe government, academia, maybe? And then, so last week, I think I saw a majority of our participants were small business, I think from your. And so what I've done, and with the help of Jessica, so I'll introduce her. We have put together some things that you kind of get to see both sides. So I want to give you guys that perspective. It's really hard to get a CO to come talk and give like real life perspectives in many cases, because you have to get approval to say just about everything you're going to say. You know, for what I do, my presentations, I'm involved with NCMA, National Contract Management Association, and you kind of check them out. They offer a ton of training, a lot of opportunities to really try to understand the acquisition process, contracts process. And so Jessica and I are often teaming together to provide training in those sessions. And that's what we try to do. We try to cover both sides. My experience as a CO and now in industry, and Jessica, who I'd like to introduce. Are you able to put her up so people can see her?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Jessica is a dear friend of mine. We actually met through NCMA. Jessica fills in all these gaps that I have in experience. She spent her career in industry and is extremely smart and same passion that I have to help others wherever we can to give back. And so you can see her here, and she will be tag teaming me as we go through all of this. So as you guys hear something, please ask questions. I'd love for this to be interactive if possible. And you know, and I'm gonna try to give you the most honest answer I can possibly provide you. And, you know, in many cases, I'm trying to also show you what people from the government side are taught and how they're trying to do their job, so that you guys that are in industry, that are trying to respond to solicitations, that are trying to do business with the government, have a little bit more context, kind of create some empathy, like as you're, you know, maybe getting frustrated, something's taking a long time, to understand what they're having to go through. So that's what I'm gonna try to bridge here as well. If you could go to the next slide, I just wanna, Jessica, would you mind giving us a little rundown of your experience?
Sure. Thanks, Mandy, for the great introduction. And hello, everyone. Even though I can't see you, I'm going to pretend that I can. And I'm so happy to be here. Mandy's right. We met several times over the course of years at NCMA events. And then one year we were just chatting and we both started to ping off of each other. And we said, you know, we need to start working together here and bringing these conversations to the forefront. So I'm really happy to support her here today. So I am the VP of Services Contracts at Red River Technology. So I'm based out in the Northern Virginia area, and I've bounced around in the GovCon space from contracts management into more of an operations role in small businesses. I've had price to win roles, subcontract roles, commercial roles in manufacturing, and then commercial legal operations. So I've seen a little bit of the gamut over the past 15 years and really happy to contribute to this presentation today. So we'll get started.
Awesome. All right, so last week you had Richard Green as your presenter, and you guys went through the whole gamut of the, you know, business development, capture, everything that you guys are trying to do to set yourself up for that one, right? What we're gonna try to do is kind of go into deep dive a little bit into the more contractor acquisition focused areas where we have had lots of different experiences, good and bad, that we can share with you. So we're gonna go through NDAs, TAs, some high level things on proposals, negotiations, and then we'll talk about some things that happen right around award, post-award timeframe. And that's those agreements and subcontracts. And then we'll give you guys some just general recommendations. Again, love for you to ask questions along the way. You could go to the next slide. So here, the point is like, why is it important to understand acquisitions and contracts? And all of these things that you learned last week, you know, so you get the win, it's amazing, it's exciting. Hopefully everyone in this room has felt that moment where you put in all of that hard work and now you've won, and now what? Now you gotta go execute. So that win, you know, you're on that high, you're ready to sign it. But what did you sign? You know, what is it that you gotta go do, and what are you now responsible for is really the point that we wanna make. And, you know, there's things even, you know, even being experienced, you will read the solicitation once, pick up on some things, read it again, pick up on some more things, get the award and read it again and find some things that you didn't find before. Like, this has happened to me every single time where you're just like, okay, I didn't catch that. Not a big risk or a big deal, but I'm glad I've caught it now. So you'll see that as a theme. It is reading through that solicitation as much as it is ruling at times. You've got to read it, sit down, highlight whatever your method is, and pick out those risks so that you guys can address them. Jessica, anything that you want to add here?
I think the big thing for me is assumptions. I've worked for organizations that are a little bit scared to submit assumptions, and that's fine. What the important thing here is, do you know what they are? Whether or not you want to submit them as a part of your proposal or not, that's up to your organization and how much risk you want to carry. But just make sure that you understand, if you're not stating something explicitly in your proposal, what are you assuming? You know, are you assuming that a certain person is going to be allowed to work remotely 3 days a week? Or are you assuming that you will be allowed to green the staff overtime? Are you assuming that this technology substitution is available? Whatever that is, make sure it's documented and then have the discussion about whether or not you include it with your proposal.
Yeah, and I think just a quick add, this is where having your questions out as early as possible are really important to try to get those answers. And we'll talk about that a little bit more with my quick to the next slide. Okay, I'm not gonna read these to you because you guys will get a copy of these slides, but these are the things that I see every day. And so I just wanted to make sure they were kind of right here, ready for you to access. Next one, please. And then next. All right, so let's talk about non-disclosure agreements. So NDAs, I think, very much based on maybe the type of role you're in, or how much risk they pose to you. You're in a world that is very much protecting IP. You have this same really cool widget that you've created, and you need to protect that. Your NDA, it's extremely important. I would say there's kind of a risk continuum. You're talking about general service practice. Maybe you're not as maybe it's not as risky for you, but just kind of giving you that food for thought as, not just signing off on any kind of NDA is important. And I think most folks go by this rule, but typically, if you're the prime, someone else is gonna sign your NDA, and vice versa, right? So there are times where you can make exceptions, but, if it's your product, your thought, having those terms that you're used to are gonna be really important. Especially when we're in a small business and it's not always feasible or affordable to send everything to your legal. And you want to have that thing that you can go to and know that it's good to go for what you're doing. Obviously, why do we use them? We want to protect ourselves. We want to be able to have conversations with folks. We want to learn things. But we don't want that thing that we're talking about to just jump over to the next company and person. We're protecting our IP, we're protecting our company, our maybe even the way that we do business. Maybe it's really special. And so just having those in place can be very important. We know that people can go and just, share whatever they've just learned, but this will at least give you some grounds to protect yourself or get some compensation for what has happened.
And I think, I'm sorry, Mandy, to jump in there. I think that something important to remember is, even if you do have a non-disclosure agreement in place, really try to only share the level of information that is needed for the purpose of the discussion. Because in the event something goes wrong here, you're going to have to prove harm. You're going to have to prove that the company actually did breach the non-disclosure agreement. It's not enough to say, well, I told them XYZ and now I see them doing this. You have the burden of proof as the discloser. So just be limiting with the information that you share in order to avoid some conflicts later in the road.
Yeah, thank you. And another thing we have on here. So if you haven't, already thought about it or had this conversation, maybe with your legal, is, when somebody is coming back and wanting to negotiate some terms, and they say, hey, I want the governing law to be Virginia or whatever it is, and that's not your state. There are some places that, I think everybody has to make this assessment. Typically it's like, hey, can my attorneys cover me there? Because if you have a dispute, and the same with TAs, you have a dispute that needs to resolve, you're gonna go to that location. and it can get costly really quick. And also know, do you know what those laws in that individual state are, and how they protect you? You know, are they going to be more protective of the prime or the sub? You know, and actually different states differ on their perspective, you know, the author versus the person signing. So just make sure I covered kind of all of these things. Oh, foot stomp at the bottom, which I see Nick is, you know, ED for JKR, and these are the things, you know, I'm like, guys, if you're gonna talk, please let me know, and I'll send them an NDA and get that executed really quickly. Just because I want them to be able to have conversations freely and be able to do that great business development. And that just kind of protects us and puts my mind at ease. So, you know, it's kind of working together with your team to make sure you're communicating, you know, your needs. You know, these guys are great about, hey, can you know, they'll introduce me, and that day we've got it basically taken care of. But mind going to the next slide, and actually I can stop if there are any NDA questions. And I'm not an attorney, by the way, so I just want to preface that. And then my opinions are mine and not JJR, so, but go ahead.
Do you have a template that you can provide, or is there a standard template for that, on the information, standard language for it?
Well, that's a good question. We have an internal template, you know, that's very much kind of tailored to the type of business that we do. You can't find some out there. I've known folks to take NDAs that they've received from others and say, I really like the protections in these areas. I like these words. I like these things. Drafted that, and then, you know, maybe work with legal to make sure that it's in context for what you're doing, making sure it's covering this.
There's one of the items there that you had up there said, how long does it last? And I know for our company, they last 3 years. So is that kind of standard? Is it up to the company?
So it is individual, you know, because do you want to be responsible for not disclosing for over 3 years? You know, people change, the projects change. It's a long time to have to, you know, keep that information protected. And not that you're gonna go out and tell everybody all the things that you've learned, but it's still something that you may want to consider is the length of that. So like we'll have the NDA be in place for a year, but it's protecting, you know, certain data for up to 3, or, you know, you can have those things be different. It's very much up to what your needs are.
And I
And-
think, Mandy, to that point, that's important to make that distinguish between, you know, the protection period and the active period of the agreement there. And those often get conflated within organizations of how long is the agreement actually active for the exchange of information versus after the expiration or termination, how long do you protect it? And so just make sure that you're clear on those so that you're not assuming that an NDA is still valid when maybe it's expired.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions?
This may be too basic, but are you saying that generically, there's some negotiation with NDAs?
Oh, yeah, I negotiate.
Because I received some industrial ones or
Yeah.
industry ones that are it's like, take it or leave it, with some deal breakers that I can't take.
I will say, I've read some agreements come from, big companies. And they want to say to take it or leave it, that I went back and said, look, I'm good with everything but this one thing. You know, what's gonna happen here? Can we not do business? But I have negotiated, and you know, there's no harm in asking the question if there's something that just, I mean, I've seen agreements where in the agreement, maybe this is like service agreements, but they want to now know that you're compliant with every law and be able to prove it. And, you know, and now I have a new corporate, you know, role because of an agreement that I've signed, because now they have to do reporting or something like to that extent. So that is one thing I would caution folks is in those types of agreements, read the fine print, because there is going to be something that's probably going to end up costing you money. You know, if they're offering you so much credit to go do things, that's really not for free, you know, in most cases. So just kind of keep that in mind. There's something in there that's probably either structure wise or compliance wise that you're gonna need to pay attention to. And those are the things that I've seen it in actually quite a few. And it's kind of scary, you know, like that's gonna change how we have to do business, you know? So just kind of keep a look. And if you need to do it, absolutely take that, ask your attorney.
An online question. So if you are on a project that extends to 5 years, do you renew the NDA annually?
So, okay, but you're on contract?
That's what it sounds like. You're working on.
Okay, so if you're on contract, we'll cover this a little bit later, but there's kind of two schools of thought on how you structure. One is that like your NDA, typically you have your NDA first, then you have a TA, and then comes along your agreement or your subcontract or whatever type of agreement that is. And some folks will say, nope, each individual one will stand on its own. But I think I've seen a lot of folks where it rolls into the subcontract. Now the subcontract covers all of those major things, what can be disclosed, you know, and it's going to be good for the life of that contract that you have. Unless you've done something very, very specific in your NDA or covered things far too broadly or something where it's covering multiple projects. So that's where you have to decide when is it time to do something that's a little bit more narrow in scope to cover you properly. Does that answer your question? Like it just depends on if you have that covered in your subcontract. Otherwise, if it's not, and your NDA is standing on its own, then you're going to want to probably align your coverage terms to be with your subcontract now. And you can do a modification to your existing NDA. Does that answer? Okay. Okay, so TA agreements. So, you know, a lot of the sort of rules I mentioned before are kind of at play here, especially when it comes to like the venue. This is always kind of a question, and I'm not an attorney, you know, so I've had to consult with mine and say, you know, what are we willing to sign up for? Where are you guys at? Where can you guys support me? Do you guys have experts in that state law? You know, are we gonna have to get someone else to support us? And so I just want to kind of put some, you can negotiate this. I've only had a couple instances where a company was like, just take it or leave it. And you know, you kind of take on that risk. Okay, I think, you know, this is solid enough where I can accept the risk of that state's law. And, but in most cases, we try to find somewhere neutral. Somewhere, if they're, nope, it has to be our state, and we're like, no, it has to be our state. We'll say, okay, is there a place, Illinois? If we go to Illinois, could we go to Virginia? Is there something that we can both agree to? Some other things that are really important in your teaming agreements is to just be really clear about what this is gonna cover. If you do go with a very broad approach, you're kind of leaving yourself open to that interpretation of where someone may fit into your opportunity. And so you want to make it very clear, hey, as a partner on this, you know, we will be having you do X, Y, Z, try to be specific. And if that does include some different shares or different, whether you do it based on revenue or let's say FTEs, like let's say you're doing a contract that's to get 100 people on contract with say NAS, and you have a partner and they're going to provide 10 of those. Be very specific about what that means. Because an FTE could mean 2 half-time people add up to 1 FTE in some people's interpretation of that, right? So be very clear about positions versus people versus hours or dollars. Roles and responsibilities is actually a good one. You know, if you're going to need your partner to weigh in on your proposal, provide compliant information, so you want to make that clear. Or is their role to just be ready to support when they win the contract? you know, you want to make that clear so that you know what you're signing up to, because if you sign up to also supporting the proposal and giving all your data, what does that mean? Like, do you have people to support that and can give all that information when they've asked for it? So, any other thoughts? Just kind of, you have a lot of great insights with this one and experiences.
Yeah, so I think, at the end of the day, people, when they look at teaming agreements, they're going to see a lot of the same clauses that you see in your non-disclosure agreements, about disputes and governing law. But what it comes down to is work share and proposal support. What are you doing as a teaming partner in terms of preparing the proposal? And then if the award is made, what are you getting or what are you giving out? And so I think it's important to make sure that you capture all of these elements when you're reviewing it and not necessarily agree to an individual element without looking at everything as a whole. Because there may be gives and takes here. You may be willing to take less work share if the agreement is non-exclusive. And so then you can also be on another team for the same opportunity. You may be willing to take a larger work share, but defined in a narrower scope and at certain rates. So just make sure that you look at everything as a whole and how it works together, because that will really impact the success of your forthcoming contract.
Yeah, and I'll get to your question here in a sec, but just on that exclusive versus non-exclusive, just kind of real life story, you have, probably many of you have a role on a big IDIQ somewhere, right? And you've had somebody come to you and want a team and you're like, yes, okay, this is great. Well, then you later on want to have the opportunity to bid with someone else on another opportunity. And that could be fine, depending on the structure of that vehicle. But you signed an exclusive with this company and they wrote it very broadly to cover the IDIQ, and now you are locked in. You can mod. One thing that was always kind of funny to me, like we were taught like our second day of like contract training, guys, you're just one mod away from the perfect contract. And we always just like laughed about that. And I think though there's some truth in that, and as long as we sort of have like level heads and some logic in what we were intending to do, then you can probably fix some things. But there are going to be unscrupulous partners out there who aren't going to care about if you sign that as an exclusive and did not need to. So pay attention to that, because typically, where's the first place you guys go look in your TA is probably your share. You want to see that right away, like, okay, what are we getting? And, making sure that we're covering the right content, that is the right support. So, we even go to the extent of what task area, what part of the PWS, things like that. But maybe we would have kind of quickly just skimmed over and missed the exclusive versus not. So that's a real life lesson learned. Thankfully, we have caught those things, but it's like, oh, okay, I didn't realize this was going to be this way. So now we have to do some negotiating. Question.
Yeah, so online, so in a teaming agreement, can it also be available or allowable to include a non-compete agreement? I'm wondering if that kind of falls into the inclusive, non-exclusive.
I think I've seen non-compete language. I think it's also important, like if you are going after, let's say we're going after a IDIQ or whatever contract, and it says specifically in the instructions, if we see you more than twice, you're out, your whole team's out. So if you are going after this, it might be in your best interest. Maybe they haven't read that and they're like thinking, oh, okay, I'm gonna go both these teams. No, you probably want to include language like that. And now I know there's different versions of non-competes. I think that's what you're referring to. But basically people aren't going to bid on the same thing with someone else. So that is kind of exclusive versus non-exclusive.
We just had another one. Which states are TAs non-enforceable?
Is it Virginia? Virginia? Or, I'm forgetting all the time. Jessica, do you know?
Yeah, Virginia can actually get a little bit squirrely. So despite a lot of corporations being incorporated in Virginia, they typically will like to pick something like Delaware as their governing law for that reason.
Yeah, because ultimately, if you go to have that dispute in that state, we've seen that they will likely say that it's an agreement to agree and really not enforceable. So I've seen many corporations be in Virginia and use Delaware or somewhere else as their governing law, maybe because of those things.
I want to add one thing for the exclusive and non-exclusive, especially for small businesses. So you have a lot of different IDIQs that have both the large business and small business track. And you probably want to make sure your language is clear enough where you're able to partner a team on both tracks. If you partner, if you're exclusive for the whole vehicle on a large business, you're not gonna be able to be on a small business team.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that's a great point. Any other questions on TAs? So we're gonna be getting into, not subcontracts quite yet. Okay, so, next slide, please. Slide. All right. So,
I had to add that one for you, Mandy.
thank you. No, I really appreciate that. Because that's kind of how you're feeling sometimes. So, proposal takeaways. So this is basically like, we talked about NDAs and TAs, you know, last week you learned all the things about proposals. So we just wanted to highlight a few things again, and then we'll jump into some negotiations. So, I know I said this, but it's gonna get annoying, but to read the solicitation, and you're gonna want to read it in several times in different places, like literally put yourself in a different environment, if you can, because you will pick up on different things. And not everyone on your team is gonna want to read this document. I'm not calling out my engineers or anything, but they typically don't want to read anything that is above the PWS. But I want them to read this thing. I want them to tell me if they see something that looks weird. And if it's them asking me questions about basic acquisition, that's okay too. But I just want folks to be able to say like, hey, I saw that word up there and it says limit of this thing. What is that? You know, and it gets a great conversation happening. So it's important that everyone on this team reads it. And you already have a proposal shop kind of set up, and proposal shop can mean 1 to 2 people putting these things together, make sure everybody's reading it. Also, in my experience, I've seen, I personally been the CO for quite a few competitive solicitations. I've done a ton of sole source work. And then I've obviously been on the other side, right, receiving the solicitations. And on some of these big IDIQs, it's incredible how many questions will come in, and you will get 400 questions and answers. But the solicitation will not be updated to reflect those resolutions and the answers. So you have to be really careful. You have to know what that answer is. Do not skip that document. It can change how you propose. It can change an assumption that you had. It can change what you are actually doing. So be very, very careful about that. Make sure that you are reading all of those documents, and then actually had a contract where they kept some of the solicitation language active and intact for managing all the other task orders, which was kind of unusual. Usually you see that go over into the contract documents itself. And thankfully, you know, just like you're reading a FAR clause, you kind of start at that, okay, go to the clause, but you see, hey, where's the prescription for this, right? When do I need to include this clause? Kind of doing that same thing with your proposals. It's like, okay, what solicitation did this come out of? And just kind of mapping back through. I'm gonna say that you're not gonna always have to do that, but we've had that before. So just kind of put it out there. Okay, when it comes to some of the biggest things that we've experienced in our own debriefs, but the debriefs that I have given is, and I'll give you an example of something I worked at JP. So you work in an environment where you have many of the same engineering firms over and over again. Robotics engineers and folks that you're very familiar with. You're familiar with how the company proposes, you're familiar with even their solution that they're planning on proposing, because you've seen it, because they do tech demos. And I had a big solicitation and a vendor respond. And looking at the criteria, so your sections L and M are absolutely your most key area here, right? And that company didn't actually answer the questions, right? They didn't actually respond to that section. Instead, we got these great diagrams, we got some other things that they included. And because we knew what the solution was because of a tech demo, my engineers were very quick to want to fill in the gaps of this proposal. I very quickly had to become the bad guy of, I'm sorry, but your known information before is really not relevant. They had to answer the question. They have to adhere to that section L and M criteria. And so you determine that they have a great solution, it does these things. They didn't actually say that in their proposal. They didn't answer it. So ultimately, we had to give really tough debriefs because we knew that they had a great solution. There was other amazing solutions as well. In that case, we decided to do feedback and allow other folks and everybody to repropose or update their proposal because of the nature of what we were doing. But that's not always going to be the case. And we did allow that, we put that in our instructions that we could do that if we chose. And it's just a real life example. I've seen that happen. You're partnering with somebody, they're very, very confident with what they're planning to do and their piece of that puzzle. And, you kind of are, you're leaning on them to provide that answer because maybe you don't actually know that answer for that piece. And what we need to do is step back and be critical of ourselves and our partner, because we're together, right? We're a team, and say, how did we answer that? So just a huge foot stomp is making sure that you're answering that. And there's plenty of hindsight all over the place where you're like, oh yeah, I can see now how I did answer that. I thought I was, but I was really just kind of explaining this broader thing and not giving them the exact details that they need. Okay. The process for responding. It could be something that you've done so many times that this is like no big deal. You're great at it, you're efficient, but don't wait. There could be that question that pops up. There could be something that comes out of a Q&A or an amendment to an RFQ that they didn't give you more time, but now you need to go back and really think about something. So just making sure you're starting early so that you're not setting yourself up for super stress and not really putting your best foot forward. And like Rich had said, you're going to go through several reviews. You're going to go through a bunch of iterations, making sure that you're putting your best product in there. I went over evaluation criteria. Oh, asking questions. So, we do a Q&A period a lot of times. It'll actually be stated in your solicitation. Sometimes it's not. If you have a question that you're like, the answer to this question will change how I do things, ask it. They're not going to kick you out for asking a question, but they may not respond. So that's your risk, right? They may not, hey, no, Q&A period is over. But your question may prompt them to say, that's a great question, and that needs to be answered, and you may actually get it. And I've done that before myself. So because we thought this is really important for our competitive field to know the answer to this, so that we can get the best product back. Because like I said, when I worked at NASA, you get one shot. you don't get to try it over, usually. So, just putting that out there. Jessica, is there some things that you can add in here?
I think here, about the questions, there's definitely strategy to a lot of the questions. Some questions are just, hey, you have 2 different response deadlines. Which one is correct? Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Other questions may try to align all of the offers to make sure that you are leveling the playing field. That's a phrase that goes around a lot to make sure that you all are bidding the same thing. You may be asking for things like workload data on a time and materials type contract. Or if you had some kind of innovative strategy, maybe that's when you don't want to ask the question because you don't want to maybe tip off another competitor to the way that you're leaning. So just make sure that when you are forming your questions, you have an in-depth review internally to say what's the likely response here by the government, and then what's the likely response of competitors after receiving that same response. Because just because you are the one asking the question does not mean you're the only one receiving the answer. The answer will be distributed to all of the offers there. And then I'll just conclude with read the entire RFX. And read it again, not just the sections that you think pertain to your certain skill set or function. I've seen many RFP strategies changed because there's a hidden little nugget, maybe in the acceptance criteria section. And so it's not anywhere else in L&M, but then something there says, well, you have to do this or this will happen. And that changes your whole strategy. So just make sure you're reading every single section. There may be pieces put in multiple sections of the solicitation by the different functional teams from the government, and make sure that all of your responses are coordinated there.
Yeah, I've actually seen clauses embedded into CWS before, and while that is not typical, it happens. And if it's in there, unless you've asked the question, if they really intended to keep it in there, you have to kind of make some assumptions that maybe they do want you to be compliant with it. So just know that. Is there any questions? No. Okay. All right. Next slide.
Just a heads up, Jess has to hop off at 2.
Oh. Okay. Just.
Until
I'll go through some things here because I want her inputs on one of our slides here in a bit. Okay, so we're over to negotiations. So most of my work in my career, I say most, because it's just where I lived most of my, because we do a lot of civil work at our company. So I live in sole source world most of the time. And aircraft, you kind of understand you're working with an OEM, you're doing a lot of sole source work. And so I wanted to make sure that we also kind of covered some of those things here, and not just completely about the competitive nature of things. And so, of course, negotiation. So dependent on the solicitation, is this commercial? If it's being done as commercial, I feel like we get a little less leeway on what we can negotiate specifics on. And in some cases, you may just be like grateful it's commercial because of some of the compliance rules that come with it. Some of the things that I've negotiated in sole source that you may not think you can negotiate are actual NAICS codes, whether something's a set aside. And an example of why you may not want a set aside, and this is why I put some clauses to pay attention to, set of limitations, set aside notices. It's because, let's say you are a CIBR, phase 3 awardee, and you have this great thing. The CIBR program allows for you to have a partner. You don't have to have that same pass-through limitation, the 50%. So in those cases, I've actually asked my contracting officers, hey, we have a partner, they're expensive. Let's just say they're more expensive. You're still providing the majority of the service, the product, whatever it is, but you have this piece that's quite expensive. And they're more than 50%. In that case, Now you've taken out that sort of limitation on that. And you're not having to just go back and forth figuring out how you're gonna make that work. Instead, you can present it to the government as it is. So I just like to point that out because a lot of folks think that that's just set. You know, I've disputed NAICS code selections, product code selections, just because I know where I came from and I didn't always, know exactly because there's so many to select from. And so if they bring up a good point, then there's no harm in trying to negotiate that.
And Mandy, if I can jump in here on the NICE codes, I think that it's in some situations negotiable, even not in sole source environments. I was actually successful at changing or getting the NICE code changed on a scheduled task order because we disagreed with the NICE code that it was assigned to. And we did this just via the Q&A period, and an amendment was released and they changed the NICE code, and that actually eliminated 80% of the competition because they weren't registered under that NICE. So just be careful, what you're doing here, understand the implications of it, but understand that questions are powerful in this area.
Okay, I am going to, if you could go to the next slide. I have, Jessica, if you have just a minute, I have one slide that go to the next slide. And I can come back to that. So, and actually let's go to the next one, because this is where Jessica has so many great nuggets. This is things that she contributed to this. She actually taught an entire subcontracting session at NCMA at one of our national conferences. And so Jessica, I just want you to kind of go in here if you can.
Of course, yes. And I'm sorry about this. It's the moment that you try to be present, everything gets set on fire. So I apologize for my unplanned departure here. So subcontracts, these are my top 10 issues. So I could talk about this probably all day, but number one, flowing down or accepting all clauses from the higher level contracts. If you're functioning as a sub, you've probably seen this from your primes. And if you're a prime, please don't do this to your subs. Understanding that there may be time constraints, but all of the clauses are not mandatory. And you'll know that because when you look at the clauses, it will say at the very bottom, you are required to flow this down to your lower tier subcontractors. So those are the only mandatory clauses. Everything else is really subject to negotiation and as needed for the performance of the agreement. So to avoid a lot of the back and forth, take a look at it, understand what the scope is of your subcontractor, and go ahead and do them a favor and delete things that don't apply. If it's a commercial contract, take out the clauses that are inapplicable to commercial contracts. There's so many different things here, and just be open to negotiating with your subcontractor as long as there's a rationale for not accepting the clause. Number two, ignoring the order of precedence clause. You can fight over different components of the subcontract, but then there's that one little section that says, the attachment A takes precedence over attachment B, and you fought tooth and nail for everything in attachment B. Well, it doesn't quite matter anymore if there's a conflict between those two documents. So make sure before you execute anything that you carefully look at the order of precedence and see what the highest level document says and make sure that you're aligned with that, because that will decide any dispute in that area. Payment terms. I kind of talked about this on teaming agreements, even though most people will not talk about payment terms in teaming agreements, but it's just negotiating them in coordination with your pricing. So you may bid, $50 an hour if you thought that you were being paid net 15. But if you're going to be paid net 90, you need $70 an hour to make it worth your while. Maybe you have to get financing. So incorporate all of those negotiations together. Failure to identify the responsibilities of each party. That's flowing down all of the scope, right, from the prime contract. Who is actually responsible for submitting the deliverable? Who is doing this part of the work? You need to identify specifically what the subcontractor is doing. And if you are the sub, make sure that you're not accepting a ton of language there that's covering scope that you're not actually performing, because this is assuming risk on your part if you sign that subcontract. warranty, I'm really talking fast. I'm so sorry here. But ignoring the warranty provisions here, I think we can tend to gloss over those because maybe our organizations don't have an in-house insurance professional to talk about what's the cost of meeting a warranty. Do you have to reperform it? How much is that going to cost you, whether that's a product or a person redoing work? Insurance requirements there. Are you accepting a requirement for, airplane hangar insurance when you are not performing that scope of work? Make sure that you cross it out of your subcontract agreement. Otherwise, you have just signed up to do it, even though it has nothing to do with the admin services that you're providing, for example. Number 7, assuming nothing will change. That's why we have the changes clause. Things may change. Be prepared for it. Understand how you're going to pivot if needed, and what one change in an area will affect in another area of your subcontract. So don't be afraid to say, well, if you're changing, the rate for this or the level of effort for this person, that doesn't necessarily change the price or the delivery. There's termination clauses. We like to pretend like we're all going to get along and nothing bad is going to happen, but please pay attention to those clauses and understand how they're triggered. Is the termination for convenience clause in your subcontract? Can it be exercised for any reason or only if the prime's contract is terminated for convenience? And make sure that you're clear on those terms and accepting that risk. Option years. This is a fun one because it can kind of be played in the same way as termination clauses. Option years are not automatic unless your subcontract actually says that. So look at that language, whether it says the subcontract's option year will be exercised if the prime's is exercised, or if it's at the election of the prime, because maybe then they don't terminate the subcontract. They just don't exercise the option. So just take a look at that and make sure that you're understanding so that you can forecast properly for your staffing and revenue. And then again, shrugging off just disputes clauses. Again, we like to think that nothing is going to be an item of contention here, but just make sure that you're okay with the governing law. Did you agree that disputes are going to be handled in Hawaii? And now every time you have to go and do mediation, everybody has to get on a plane. So just take a look at those clauses and make sure that you're aligned with all of these. These are the biggest 10 issues that I see with subcontracts. I know it's a lot, but I think that it's a good list to take a look at when you're negotiating and making sure that you at least pay attention to these areas here.
Thanks so much, Jessica. So I know you gotta run. But thank you, kudos to you, can hear me clapping over here for you. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. You're in such good hands with Mandy. She is the professional, and I hope to work with you all again. So thank you so much.
All right, so before I'm gonna go back a couple slides just to quickly go over a couple of things, but
Tell me which,
stay on subcontracts real quick. Kind of finish that one out.
which one?
This one.
This one, okay.
So there's a couple in here that when she went through them, just, termination, the options, that one is actually a big thing. You'll see, I've had a lot of primes only, but my pricing and everything for that current year. Not only, even if the intent, everybody's intending, or if it gets exercised, you're also getting your option. When they're getting ready to do that a year later, can you guys actually find that information? I mean, I hope so, but it's buried somewhere now in your files, and you're gonna go on a little treasure hunt to go make sure that you found the right document to capture what your pricing is for that option year. And imagine if you're doing that for every year. So for 5 years, you're now trying to go back and find out. So if you can lay it out, even if it's something that's an exhibit that is pointed to, or something that can help capture that information at the time, that's just more of a personal lesson learned, just so that you're not having to go back and go hunting for the information later. And because if people leave, change positions, that information isn't always easy to find. Let's see. I think preparing, Jessica made some really great points about preparing if you have to terminate. I think I feel really lucky that we have a lot of great partners that, you know, that's not been something that's on our radar. But you never know if the government has to turn, you know, if they're changing something in your contract. It may be because you have to, because your contract has changed. So think about how that would work in that scenario and make sure that you're captured and even talk about it with them. Like, hey, if this happens, how will this work for us? Because every company's different. Do I have any questions in the subcontract section, before I move on?
You have them back at the teaming agreement.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll go back. We'll go back. I know I skipped forward. I went to negotiations, still back to key elements of the contract. Right there, and I'll go ahead and see if I can answer this.
This question is, how long is the term of a teaming agreement enforced when writing proposals with the sub? So I'm wondering, it is, you know, how long is that teaming agreement before the proposal?
So I would, if you're writing a teaming agreement, make sure that you left yourself enough runway to cover, you know, getting that in place. So like, if you know you're bidding on a big contentious IDIQ that's gonna be protested 16 times, that you're making sure that your TA is going to cover through the award of that contract. Maybe I might not answering the question right, but then what I would recommend is once you are to that point where you're writing a subcontract, make sure that your any important terms or things, they actually get flown, you know, flow into your subcontract. Is that?
So I would suggest that you make sure the teaming agreement has the same validity period as the proposal.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and
The subcontract.
yeah, they're all kind of different. I mean, I think, gosh, if we put ours in place, maybe like to cover a period of maybe a year. And then, you know, you can extend if needed, if something's, because I mean, if you guys have tried to do business, it can take years to go from a great idea that you're working with your requirements owner for to get to actual execution. So that can be a reality and you would want to capture that and hopefully folks will just extend because that's being a good partner. Okay, so hopefully that answered it. It can clarify if they need to. Key elements for contracts. So this is quick, but the big thing I like in this slide is the four corners approach. And I remind kids of this actually, because what is in your contract is what you do. It's how you're governed. It's what you have to be compliant with. If you've had a sidebar conversation with somebody from the government or even a partner, and it's not part of that contract, it's not, you know, let's say it's a favorable thing to you, they're gonna ask, well, it's in there. You don't have it. And so I think it's really important to remember, like, things can happen very quickly, so executing changes in a timely manner is really important for everybody. And making sure that your folks on your team know what those things are. We go through before I will sign off on a mod or contract award. I have my teams reading their PWS. What does the DD-254, the security document say? You know, is there something that's like, oh, hey, did you know that we're supposed to do this? Because especially in sole source world, you're not seeing those things until right at the board. A lot of times, we're not getting big full up, you know, draft documents at solicitation. Instead, it's a very quick letter. Hey, respond to this PWS, and then we'll get the actual award document, you know, at the end. And you have to make sure that you're quickly resolving any kind of issues that you see here or conflicts. And so just putting those things out there. Of course, I think you guys know, like, in our business, you're gonna want to write these things down and have mutual agreement. In the government, you're gonna hear a word a lot, consideration. So essentially, the government's gonna want to see, like, so if they're gonna extend your contract, do a note, like, let's say it's a no cost. Usually, they're actually documenting a reason why that's allowed. It's not just like, yeah, go ahead. No, they did this, we did this, we're taking ownership of this, they're doing that. And so you're always kind of documenting why you're allowing something to happen outside the basic terms of what you agreed to. The only time recently that I've seen a no consideration change is, because of the insane inflation and allowing COs to make changes to rates on contracts if you ask for it. And that was, you know, I don't think that that's still available. It was available for about, I think, 18 months. GSA, DOD, and there were several letters out there kind of allowing a, like, basically, you didn't have to exchange more work for that thing. They could just do it because an unprecedented, we couldn't have anticipated that inflation would be so crazy and a pandemic, you know, those things. So those are the only times I've ever really seen where they said, no, you know, you don't have to document what that consideration is. Could go to the next. So I skipped ahead, but I wanted to kind of keep these in order. But typically, before you have a subcontract, you're not going to get that, you know, the project's not going to get the award, and you're not typically going to have a subcontract the next day, unless you've done some pre-negotiating, because you still need to work through all those terms. And as we know, sometimes you are awarded something, you're not quite, you know, sure how they're going to award the structure, maybe of those CLINs, or how they might break out something, and so you kind of wait till you can see that final award document before you structure your set contract. And so I think a document that probably a lot of people in here are familiar with is an authorization to proceed. This is something that you know, industry typically uses. We, on the government side, would use UCAs if I needed to put something in place quickly without having that full contract document. Some of the things that are different, you know, on the industry side, basically as the prime, I'm sending my partner this letter. And I'm saying, hey, you are it, we're ready, we've been awarded, and it's sort of framing the days that we have to negotiate. Depending on the type of contract and what we're doing, I may allow, you know, some invoicing. Hey, you can invoice up to a month's worth of work while we negotiate this. Maybe we already know what that is. It's based on their proposal to us. Maybe, you know, you've already decided on rates, and you can put those in there. As the receiving person, I would want to have as much, you know, firm things as I could in that document so that I can, no kidding, say, okay, team, go forward without having as much risk on me, because ultimately you can't come to terms on that. Now you just eat all that costs of supporting that contract. For the UCA, so most people are not going to have to deal with this. It's the very first thing I ever did in the government is definitize a 3-year-old UCA. And I didn't even know what contracts was, and I had to learn what this is and brief generals basically on a weekly basis. And it is one of the most painful things I've ever went through. So I'm like, we avoid them at all costs. But they do, you know, create ceilings and have some limitations on what can happen in there. But they do allow invoicing. You can incur costs. It's done on a cost type basis until you can definitize. So most people won't have to deal with that, but it is a tool. So let's say, you know, something in the world happens. It's an emergency situation. You will see these happen. You'll see UCAs and we'll just figure it out. So that's usually when we have them. You could go to the next slide. Any questions? on Any of those? It's pretty straightforward. But next slide, please. Okay, so part of all of this, you know, you've got all these little tips and you've got kind of walk through all kinds of things. Richard did a very extensive session last week on all of this. But just kind of for me, understanding the acquisition process, the contracting process has come in so handy in kind of understanding where things are at. living in a sole source world, understanding that they have to go through legal clearance, and where those levels are really important for you to be able to help your BD team, your capture team, your leadership say, when is this gonna hit? You know, and you can predict that out, and I'll show you some other tools that I use to help us get there. They don't always work. Things come up and schedules are delayed, but it helps you to predict better where that revenue is gonna start hitting for you guys. Let's go. Okay, invoice. So I know we mentioned this earlier, but I have an example for you, and hopefully you won't have to go through this. But for one, that should be something you're looking at how you do that right away. So if you're working with the DoD, they're gonna want to use wide area workflow, and you have to get through it in this tool called PIDE. And to get yourself an account, you have to load documents from your company, you have to maybe you can get a token so you can access. There's a lot of steps to this. It is not easy. And so I don't want you guys to you're so excited, you're getting to work, you're a small team. So maybe you are the COO, you are actively working on the contract, invoices in your world as well. And now you're like, oh gosh, yeah, we gotta get our invoices in. Well, you haven't set up these accounts. Now you're waiting possibly through a whole nother period while you get all of these things set up for yourself. So make sure you're understanding what that's gonna look like and leaving yourself enough room. Invoicing has been one of those things where you kind of learn as you go. That's on a lot of these things, because doing business with the government is not always intuitive. It's not always easy. It can be very frustrating, and also be one of the most rewarding things that you'll do in your career. But there's a lot of things that, you know, are not perfect. And an example that I have, and I do share, so in many cases, we like to do a term where, hey, we're gonna pay when we get paid. And we'll pay very quickly after that point. And why we've had to do this is because we've experienced it so much. You're a small business. Unless you're ready to go out and get some financing or pay out of your pocket, how are you gonna pay for this new thing that you just got? We had a situation happen on multiple occasions, unfortunately, where our information was not entered correctly into EDA, tool that the government uses, by the CO. When that invoicing was trying to occur, it went over to DFAS, sorry, I'm thinking through my acronyms, went over to DFAS, and while we had everything right on our end, they denied it because that was not correct. Okay, so there's some mismatching happening in the system that we were completely unaware of. Well, when that mismatching happens, now it gets sent back to the CO, and it kind of starts over. Well, in our case, we had this happen on 3 different occasions. Our COs never got any kind of notification that was back in their box to review. And we're having to call, hey, what happened to this? Why was it denied? Like, you know, we're not really getting any kind of information because it wasn't our fault, right? It wasn't our problem. So now we're working with the CO and having to walk through, and they're not experts. I was not an expert in this. It's like, it was sort of like, I'm always very honest about where I was mentally when I was working these things, because you're just, I mean, it's fire hose all the time. So now you gotta go in and approve these things, and you think you've done it right. Intuitively, maybe you thought you did it right, but there was something you didn't put. Now it's wrong. And so then we were behind a month or 2 months in some of these cases just getting paid. Well, if you're a really small company or whatever your financial situation is, you may now have to go use some financing. You need to pay your people, you need to pay your partners or whatever it is, your investments. And guess what? Financing is unallowable, you know, and you can't just get that back when you're doing your cost structure, your accounting. And yeah, maybe you'll get some interest, But in most cases, the way that their system's set up, the clock really kind of just started over and we didn't get that benefit, right? And it's not usually gonna cover what your costs are in financing. So really important just to tackle that as early as possible. Do not let it linger. If you're the lucky ones, you've been, you've got great cash flow and you can cover those things, awesome. But it's not the case for, thousands of companies who are just trying to get off the ground, okay? So just watch out for those things. So I put on here, understand the PPP process. So this is where all the planning and budgeting happens for all these big programs. So if you're at Right Pat, the things that are being done now were planned for, let's say, 3 years ago. They were starting to get into that process at that time. And these are things that they know they wanted to. So if you're just a small business, maybe you are a CIBR, maybe a CIBR 3 that you were successful with. But how would they have planned for you 3 years ago? You're new to the world. So you have to really understand their processes so that you can take advantage of times when they can use some, what they call you for unfunded requests, because they've got some money that didn't get spent somewhere else. So understanding that process, we actually have, not to like promote WIN here or anything, but in February, we do have Marjana Jupshin coming to be our speaker, and she's going to help us demystify that whole process. So you understand from both the government and the industry perspective why it's important when things happen. And I'll be moderating with her and another special guest. So take those opportunities to try to learn about that process. It's going to allow you to ask better questions. And that's why I say understand the acquisition process. You guys have a couple guides in here. So if you have never read a source guide, we'll say it's a little dry. Probably not going to be your, enjoyment reading for the weekend, but understanding what our COs and our PMs are taught to do is really important. And how you can now respond to that in a way that makes sense and that you guys are speaking the same language is so important. I feel like, a lot of times our teams internally will have questions. Hey, why are they doing that? We've had a delay on something like something, and I'm like, okay, I know the things that are happening in there, and it's very frustrating to wait and to not get any work. Why is something delayed? But if you know that they're going through this, they've had to go through this authority, that they've had to go to this level, you know that there's a lot of things out of their control in that time frame, and then you can kind of make those adjustments. I'm going to try to finish up here in a second. You could go to I put colors of money. I actually have a couple slides in here for you that I'd like to go to. So go to the next slide. This is an example. You can go to this link and kind of check these out. This is service acquisition, and it shows you kind of all the things that they're going through. Next slide, please. Okay, this is an example for you. Very much an example. Don't take any states. You're going to want to actually talk with your counterpart and map this out for both of you. And this is what I was talking about, understanding how long this process is going to take so that you can accurately predict when your revenues are going to start, when you're going to need to bring people on. It's going to help everybody on your team understand the things that are happening. And then I also included a link to go check out HALT, so current lead time. So it's really important. It's something that's tracked, and it's probably something that's a big point of contention, when things are taking a long time. Next slide, please.
We have plenty of time, by the way. So
Well, I know, but you also have Joel, so I want to make sure Joel's got ample time to do
he's
all this.
only got a small amount of cards, so
Okay.
just will let you know.
All right, well, it's okay. Well, I still have enough, we'll go through. Is everybody familiar with the color of money and what this means? If you haven't seen something like this, I'd say this is an example. This is an old chart because now it has space as its own column. But understanding this has come in handy for us on quite a few occasions. This is something, one of the first things you kind of learn as a contracting officer is when you can use your money. So once your money is approved by Congress, if it's R&D funds, you have 2 years. procurements, 3. Not a lot of us are dealing in ships, but in case you are, you've got, and then O&M is where a lot of us are hanging out, with those funds, and that's 1-year money. So you have basically 1 year to start the use of those funds, which is made incredibly challenging when Congress does not approve their budgets until March or April. So now our teams have essentially 2 months to execute their funds before people start taking them away to use for other things. So just know it's a very stressful for them too, because a lot of times they're not getting, like, let's say, divvied out the money from their controllers until those budgets are truly approved. They're very much piecemeal. And it's really hard to go out and do your big procurement if you're just a piecemeal of money. So that's why we'll show them, that's why you see all the things happening at the end of the fiscal year, unfortunately. If you go to the next slide, I want to walk through this one with you guys. Have you guys ever read a long-term accounting? And know what these mean? Because this can actually help you quite a bit. So, for instance, if you look here, so the appropriation, and I'll go through this whole line, but you see this appropriation, 1506. Jim, can you flip back to the last chart? So 1506, I'm gonna look here. All right, this is a long line of accounting to do Navy aircraft procurement. All right, so it's under procurement, it's 3-year money. You can go back to the next slide. Okay, so 3-year money. Akron's just a placeholder for every time you have a long line, you can create a new Akron. It just gives its own like indicator essentially. Service designator, so 17. This would be Air Force, Navy. So I think Air Force is like 52 or something like that. Maybe you go back actually. One slide. Anyway, you can find them out, online, but it will tell you exactly who it is, and sorry, go ahead, go. It'll tell you exactly who it's been sent to or appropriated for. These other things, these are more internal information, but those first 4 indicators in the beginning here, right there, so you'll see that. So let's say we're in FY 24, anything that you see that's starting this year will have a 4. Sometimes it'll be a 2. A lot of times it'll just have 1. Sometimes you will see an X, and that means no year money. So there's a lot of flexibility. It's typically though stated for something that is specific. It's a congressional, hey, you guys are going to use this money to upgrade things for veterans or something like that. So does anybody have any questions? And did you just find this useful? I feel like a lot of people like this slide because kind of learn a little something. Because if in your own contract, you can go in and read your long line and understand the purpose, when that money started and how long it lasts, you can actually help them problem solve when they get behind, when now maybe you've had an underrun or an overrun, you can help them solve their problem and say, hey, actually that money is good for another year. So if we need to extend that out, it should be fine. And you all know, a lot of times you're working with a core or a PM or requirements owner, not direct with the CO. The COs are trained highly on this. Maybe other members of the team are not. Usually your PMs should have gone through this training. But I know a lot of my cores don't know this. A lot of times they were an engineer yesterday and today they are a contracting officer representative. So they're learning on the fly. So this can help if you can help answer this question. If you want to go to the next slide, I have some resources. And if I have a minute, I do want to show you guys a tool. You mind pulling that up? Yes.
Okay, hang on, give me a second here.
I'm just gonna go through this really briefly
You want
and,
to go through it first, or do you want to go to the site?
go ahead and go to that website.
Right.
You pulled it up.
Yeah, hang on, you're going through the restroom, so I come on.
Oh,
Hang on 1 second.
well, he's pulling that up. So this will be the last thing I go over with you guys. So it's a pretty helpful tool. Oh, it's okay if you find it. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, that spot that you have for that long line accounting, where do you find that at? You said you find it on the contract or where else
So
do you
yeah,
find
the
it?
long line of accounting is gonna be in your funding section of the contract.
Okay,
Okay, so if you have the contract writing system is a little different. Sometimes you'll actually see it with the CLIN information. A lot of times you'll see like the CLINs, and then you'll have a section that's just giving you a bunch of information. Because their system's maybe not great at like laying it out in a user-friendly way,
Mhm.
but you'll just see numbers and you'll recognize these numbers real quick.
good.
And,
Where-
go
I
ahead,
didn't mean to cut you off, but where else would you find it besides the contract? You said,
you're not typically gonna find it anywhere.
they were, when you said the money part, you said they have to use the money in a year, or you said something about the money, like, you tell them that we have this amount of time to spend the money or something like that.
Right, yeah, so let's say I have a contract, we're wanting to, our requirements owner is saying, hey, there's some things that we'd like to do. And maybe our scope allows us to change path a little bit. Well, I can look on here and they're like, oh gosh, our money's about to it be expired, like we can't use it anymore past that point. Maybe you're on a cost type contract or something. You could find that useful by going and looking and say, oh, no, rest assured, we're good. Kind of answering a question before they have to go to their CO to confirm all that information.
Okay.
So just kind of like the more the more powerful you will be as a problem solver. Okay. DAU, Defense Acquisition University, if you guys aren't familiar with it, so if you work for the government, you get to go take some training at DAU. And it's not everybody in the government, civilian orgs have some of their own like training academies. But for the most part, DAU hosts a lot of training for folks. And they have this tool out here, it's actually kind of in their contracting world. But I find it very useful because as you scroll down here, so you're gonna see, so these different colors are gonna indicate like what's kind of happening in that phase. But it goes through these key FAR parts that are being used every day. So our COs are taught the road, the subway map. And so I want you guys to know this is out there, it's free, you can go find it, it's linked in here. And you can explore it yourself. So let's say you're, somebody's got a dispute on a clause, you can go to that section, you can read through it, there's resources tagged in there. If you go down, I'm kind of just looking through here, kind of go to, let's see, competition, part 6.
Included?
Yeah. So look, you've got additional training, and then I think there's, close that. And click on the thing that's below it. See if, is there, no, that,
Part five,
but part 6. Because you clicked in
part 6, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just don't know if they have different links. Okay. So it's going to take you into act.gov, right, where our actual clauses live. And so in here, it's just a different way to depict it, because the FAR, I find it to be frustrating. Learning it was not the most fun part of my job, and I felt like it was just so much to really have to try to take in. And I really like the subway map because it gives you a different view of where to find things, and it's got tons of linked great information. Can you go back to the subway map? Okay, if you go down, just kind of want to cruise down through the bottom. If there's anything I want to point out here. As you can see here, look, we have solicitations, evaluation. You guys can go click in here. You can see what kind of information that they have linked in, trainings. I mean, I've linked some trainings and stuff for you guys as well. But what they try to do is make it so that it's in a logical order or section that they might use it. So then you might use it then as well. So just making sure that you guys kind of see this and have this as a resource and can kind of go play in it and see if you learn anything from it. So when we do NCMA trainings, this is actually a full day seminar. We walk through all of the things. It's a lot of information, but like we do, like Jessica and I were trying to do, try to give you real life examples and some context so that when something pops up later in your acquisition life, that you can kind of think back and be like, well, how did they do that? And how was that applied? And, you know, and try to make sense of it, because the FAR is not easy reading. And it's not always like, you don't always read a clause and right away understand what it really means. So, and that's me. I'm not saying that everything, you know, is probably FAR geniuses in here, but, I'm just putting myself out there that it wasn't always the easiest thing for me to do. So I can't expect everyone else to think like, oh, this is breeze. So anyway, any questions? I am done, and then we can take a refreshment break and come back and absorb all of Joel's wonderful pricing information. No? Okay, we're going. Yeah.
Yeah, what was the website or what was that? Maybe that
It's
you
the
can-
DAU subway map, and I have it linked in my presentation, which Jim will provide. And DAU you can actually go out and find, so I also, in the other resources, you have the contracting code. You know, you can look at the risk frameworks and contract types, because also knowing contract type, you can negotiate that, so. Just keep that in mind. Know why they use it, know what they're being taught on a risk continuum for contract type. So if you can show them that it is prudent or best interest to go the other direction, absolutely do it. And then adaptive acquisition framework is a really cool tool, and then acquisition tools. So like if you were wanting to train your client-facing PMs who are now doing delivery to your government clients, it's a great place to show them, because they can start to absorb acronyms, the words, the things that the phasing, the required compliance, all the things that are very much part of what they're doing to deliver is in that framework. So, all right, well, I'm off stage now, and if you guys do have any questions, I put my LinkedIn and my email in there. You're welcome to message me or Jessica, and we'll try to get you an answer. But you also have Apex rep in the back, who's also, an acquisition SME in his own right, and can answer some questions, and, a lot of resources out there. Jim can answer all your questions too. All right, thanks, guys.
Little break. 5-10 minutes. Don't need.
Oh, you say it. You call me Emily, so. Yeah. Yes.
So it takes me a while to get my shit together and remember. It's sad.
Sorry.
Our database is getting full. We've got, if you're going to your database, you've got like 15 Scots, 15 names, you're the same name, you're like, oh god.
So you got me with somebody needs your. They're gonna have a picture over there.
But had a conversation. Good, so just had a good.
I know.
event at the Red Pack Club is kind of.
Two different messages. Yeah.
Okay, Joel,
So,
you ready to go? You're on mute right now.
Well, I don't have a D class day. Oh, it's nice.
Joel, can you hear me?
And I think there's a new movement.
You're muted.
Not- but
Joel, you're muted, buddy.
maybe, is armed forces.
Well, I can hear myself.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, we knew
I'm
that.
glad we talked. Yeah, great.
Okay, let's go ahead and get
I'm
started.
not gonna talk to you. Every time it's like bad news.
I'm telling you something's canceled.
Okay, we're gonna start back up. Joel,
Yes,
okay, all right. Go ahead and start, buddy.
testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
You hear
Why don't you
me?
put my slides up?
This not your slides?
Huh?
Can you see? Can you not see
Yeah.
the slides?
All right, folks, good afternoon, Joel Krock. I think actually I've been in that room before for an Air Force conference, maybe like around 2017, 2018. Sorry, I can't be there today, but there in spirit and on the computer. So there you go. So I've been doing government contract stuff for a long time. You can see some notes here. And I guess, you know, besides this background and expertise in pricing and pricing strategy, price to win, you can kind of see what I'm about here. Full spectrum of different agencies. And I'll say right now, we're always looking for teaming partners, good, mostly small businesses with good small business quals, working on, especially right now, some VA and HHS opportunities. And so just a quick plug, if there are some contractors out there who are trying to prime or sub some civilian VA, HHS deals, let me know. All right, let's just get into it. So basically, we have an agenda here, and so we'll go through pretty much one slide each, and it's going to be chock full of a lot of stuff. So I'll wait at the end of each slide for questions. And a lot of these topics like price to win, for example, could go on for 20 or 30 slides, but we won't do that today, especially after your break. And I guess what time is happy hour?
4 o'clock.
I might join you vicariously, or at least have a beer here on my dining room table. But let's just get into it, because I guess it's 3 o'clock, and I will try not to go past 4 based on questions. So let's just do it.
Take your time.
Okay. So let's see, pricing strategy. All right, let's see what I said here. So pricing strategy, there's a lot to it, obviously, and a big driver of pricing strategy is the contract type. So you can kind of go through here and see the different types of strategy. One of the biggest drivers, or the biggest bang for your buck, and I guess I will cover this later as well, are BOEs. And so not every proposal requires a BOE, a basis of estimate. That's where the government allows the contractor to figure out themselves a solution, which will include 10, 20, 100, 200 humans to do the work. And so unlike labor rates that we'll talk about, or profit percentages, that headcount number, that is the biggest driver for your bid. And so having a well thought out, so for those deals where you need to put a solution together, you know, you, or if you're subbing, your prime needs to put a solution together, then make sure they have a good solution architect and a lot of good background on the opportunity from, you know, prior years, and that write-up, that rationale write-up on why the team believes that 62 FTEs across these labor categories and hours, why 62 is the right number, not 42, not 82. And then oftentimes, even if the government was thinking of a number, you know, higher or lower for that staffing plan, they might be either swayed by a good BOE write-up, or at least give you a chance to revise it for an amendment. So let's see so cost plus, that's the lowest risk. Pros and cons to cost plus. And basically your costs are covered, which is great. Your fee is capped, and that's not so bad either. And there's still a lot of cost plus deals out there, especially in the DoD. And so I guess one of the big drivers there for cost plus deals is the level of detail required. And so it's low risk from a standpoint of your execution, but there's usually lots of detail. The government usually wants 3 years of indirect rate data and payroll screenshots. And so maybe my word of warning is, if you come across a cost plus deal, either if you're handling it internally, then allow a lot of time to gather all this information, or you could also hire a good, you know, consultant or two to help you with that. T&M. So T&M's kind of in the middle. What do I say here? The rates, yeah, I guess like for T&M, if you're doing a rate card, which is just a laundry list of rates, and you want to be most competitive, most of you have probably heard about rates that are keepers and rates that are throwaways, and you want to price the keepers high enough, the ones you have expertise in. And so if your expertise is in software engineering, you want to make sure your software engineering T&M rates have a healthy salary, your full indirect rates, and a good typical or you know, good fee percentage. Other ones, like say software engineering is your expertise, and you have some labor categories that may be help desk or financial analyst, or things you're not that interested in. Maybe you want to price those a little bit lower, maybe, you know, lower quartile salary. We'll talk about salary survey data, but if you're using, you know, a good healthy 75th percentile salary data for your keepers, you might want to go with 50th percentile or even lower potentially for the ones you don't really care about. So there's a lot, there's an awful lot there. And so any questions right now?
Not just,
It's, he's talking about 75th percentile, why wouldn't we just use government rates? The rates for staffing.
And so I barely heard that. What was the question? I'm sorry.
Why would we not just use the federal government rates for pricing, for staffing?
Use the federal government rates. Well, I guess every agency is different. I'm not exactly sure. So you mean
You're looking at the Department of Defense, they pay consultants this amount of money for particular projects. Okay, well, I'll use that as the staffing rate that they would approve. They usually give you a range.
Oh, so where is that list located? Is like that a GSA rate sheet you're talking about, or what?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, why wouldn't we use that?
Well, because say that rate for like, I'll keep on the software engineer, say that rate's $220 an hour. And you could bid based on your knowledge of your indirect rates and salaries you're paying those people, and you only need 10% fee, you actually might be able to bid 160 versus that published 220. And if someone's bidding 220 and you're bidding 160, there's only the two of you, all things being equal, you win. That's why.
Hey, Joel.
Yeah.
When you go over your charts, you got a lot of acronyms. Can you just share the acronym definitions too? Just in case there might be some people in here fairly new to government contracting.
Well, that takes all the fun out of it, doesn't it?
I know. Yeah, I know, it's alphabet soup to some people is what I'm saying.
I have a couple. So BOE, I talked about basis of estimate. Again,
Yep.
how many FTEs?
Full-time employees.
How many FTEs? FTE, full-time equivalent. FTE is like one. So one FTE, and then the government has different number of hours. You know, many proposals, many RFPs state what the FTE count, or sorry, what the hours are for an FTE. And so someone online here talked about FTEs being 2080. So 2080, and if there was like an actual, you know, CFO type or an accounting type on here, he or she would be like, well, it's not 2080 anymore. I think I heard for this year, it might be 2096 because there's a couple of extra days, work days involved. But 2080 is basically 52 weeks times 40 hours a week. So do the quick math, it's 2080. But if there's an extra day or two in there, it could be a little bit higher. But in FTE is typically somewhat less than that, because it's only the work hours. And so it's typically more like 1880. And so 1880 is 200 less, a lot of numbers here, than 2080. And those 200 hours are a combination of 3 weeks of vacation and a couple of weeks of holiday. And so yeah, never bid 2080 for your FTE count, or no, sorry, for your FTE number of hours, because that's not competitive. And so someone's asking for calculations. I guess these are in my head right now, but I guess we can talk about those later. All right, what else, folks? All right, moving on.
Yep, moving on. Next slide.
So Eileen's making me laugh. So I don't have the ability to, like, you know, draw right now, but just like write Eileen on a piece of paper, okay? Write 2080 on top, okay? And then deduct 120 hours for 3 weeks of vacation, all right? And then deduct another 80 hours for 10 holidays. And if you do those 3 things, the result is 1880. Make sense? So IDIQ task order strategy. What did we say here? So this is sort of like, you know, the T&M guidance, talking about pricing IDIQ rates high enough to allow, yeah, for discounting. Gosh, especially somebody mentioned GSA, especially for your GSA schedules. And, you know, I'm not, I've done a couple of GSA schedules. They're not my favorite, but make sure when you put them together that you can live for the next like 5 or probably 10 years with those rates. Because I'm dealing right now with a number of proposals where the GSA rates are low and they're very hard to work with. So don't, and I've seen an awful lot of RFPs coming out under GSA, more than usual. And so if you are in the process of putting together or thinking about putting a GSA schedule together, you know, either, well, you probably need a good GSA consultant. And I have a couple of you know, friends of mine who can help, but the key there is to make sure the rates are very healthy and healthy for years to come. So again, yeah, same type of thing. The rates you're more interested in are priced higher or more healthy. And again, when I say healthy, meaning the salaries are either actual people's salaries who are paid well, plus your indirect rates. Make sure you understand your indirect rates. If you don't, that's like a different type of consultant from the GSA consultant. But you know, again, I have some friends who can help with that type of thing. And so I talk here as well about unbalanced pricing. I haven't seen that in a while, but for these larger IDIQs, what you don't want to do is say you're asked to provide 3 levels of software engineer, levels 1, 2, and 3. And you want the level 3 that requires like 10 years of experience, and you want a $200 an hour rate for that senior level engineer. That will fit a nice you know, $180,000 salary, a good indirect rate, and maybe 15% or so profit. But then if you're trying to be more competitive and you think it will help to then price your junior level software engineer at, as I say, $50 an hour, that's not realistic. Like nobody, so nowadays, even kids out of school are making, say, 60, 70 bucks an hour. That's like $30, $35. No, I'm sorry, 60 or $70,000 a year, kids out of college. That's about $35 an hour at 70K. So with indirect rates and profit, 50 bucks an hour is not realistic. Maybe for like a tech or like a high price janitor. So what I'm trying to get to is don't make it so obvious that you're throwing away certain labor categories, because that's, and then based on agency, it's either more or less frowned upon based on who the customer is. Any questions with all that?
What's IDIQ?
Sorry, indirect delivery, indirect quantity. So basically, it's just a, some people say it's a hunting license, or basically what the government tries to do, a lot of agencies do this, is instead of having full and open competitions for all of their needs, they'll have these IDIQ competitions where they'll take in 10 or 20 or maybe 50, or I'm not sure how many winners there are on like Alliant or CIO SP3, a couple of big IDIQs. But basically the government will get a lot of, and I'm surprised, maybe I don't know if Mandy covered this earlier, but so for IDIQs, besides a rate card, which could have 10 or 20 or 100, maybe even 200 different labor rates, different levels of you know, of labor categories and rates, And so the government will ask for those rate cards and then just narrow the field. So if they have a need, they don't get 200 proposals for something, but they can then have only the winners of their IDIQ, which could be again 10 or 20 or no more than 50 typically, winners who have rates on contract, bid on follow-on task orders. So it helps the government because then most of the contractual parts of the deal, many of them have been resolved in that IDIQ RFP and contract. And so it actually is a big help to the government. And I think most government agencies nowadays have their own IDIQ vehicles. Like NASA has NASA Soup, and help me out, folks. We got HHS has CIO SP3. Alliant is across many government agencies. Most agencies have their own IDIQs, and again, the reason is it makes it easier for the government to then award actual work down the road. Make sense?
Yeah, Joel, let me add, so just think of an IDIQ as like a multiple award, like master contract. And then all those companies compete at the task order level.
Okay,
So, they're gonna send in their individual pricing down and bid on the task orders, not. You did, the first bid is to get on that major contract, and then you bid on the individual task orders.
okay.
Isn't it essentially the same as a blanket purchase agreement,
Pretty.
which is the terminology used by, certain other.
Well, sometimes a blanket purchase agreement can be a single award. Well,
Well, true.
A relationship with GSA, where rates are published. What's the relationship between GSA rates and IDIQ there?
well, the IDIQs are separate solicitations. They're not typically, GSA may run the solicitation like for Alliant. That's a contract vehicle that they ran, and I haven't really ever used the GSA calculator. I saw somebody had a question here on that. But typically you build your pricing based on either actuals or you get salary survey data, which Joel's going to go through.
I have so many things, but it's okay. I'm gonna wait. And then if there's anything I think Joel has to cover. I'll talk for it.
Joel, you did have one other question in the chat. Or Q&A. So on FFP contracts, like DoD SBIRs, is it still that strategy to give low rates and cost volumes instead of using the GSA calculator to determine rates?
Let's see. So Craig's asking, FFP contracts, the best strategy to give low rates and cost volumes instead of using the GSA calc. And I guess there's this big GSA calc out there that I'm not that I'm not aware of, or I don't use it. And so probably maybe this is for small businesses. And so can someone tell me like what this GSA calc is all about?
I got it. So GSA Calc is basically, you can go into this tool, you can find it, it's publicly available. And it's going to take all of the published rates that are out on existing GSA contracts. And it puts all of those rates and their associated LCATs. And so how I might use them, for instance, so as a CO, let's say I just want to do some price realism. I want to just see what's out there. I may go out there and take a look. Let's say I have a sole source contract and it hasn't met the threshold for TINA or something. And my contractor has just provided me some fully burdened rates, because that's what's going to be out on GSA, right? It's going to be inclusive of your fringe, your overhead, your G&A, and your profit. And so what GSA Calc is great for is COs can go and take a look. Hey, are the rates that are being proposed in line with what's out there and available on GSA? So I have a comparison tool. I may sort and filter. Do I want to only compare to small businesses? Do I want to have larges in there? So there's some things that you can look at, and they do have things that you can pick, some filters that you can choose, years of experience. And then as a small business, let's say you are wanting to, your COs had asked you to provide the data. So hours, so essentially your basis of estimate, right? They're asking you, what are the hours? What are the LCATs? And what's the rate that you're going to charge us? Well, I've come up with my rate based on my costs. So what is the salary, data telling me for this individual, for a program manager? Well, then I have to apply my internal indirects, so my overhead, my G&A, my fringe, and of course, I would think a fair profit, come up with my rate. I want to show that my rate is not outside of the realm of possibility, and it's comparable to other folks on the market. So I may, and I usually do, I provide multiple points in mind, just because I used to do this job as a pricer for the government. So I give them what they need. But I'll actually provide a printout of the GSA Calc comparisons for them, and then they can go look and verify on their own accord. But I'm showing them that I've already done that. You don't need to do it unless you'd like to go, prove that I've done that properly. So you can use it for multiple, other people are looking at it, so you could probably use it as well. Does that make sense? Answer the question?
No, it does, yeah. Thank you for that. I guess you're, bypassing some good pricing consultants with that GSA Calc tool. Maybe that's why I don't know too much about it. But no, actually, if the government is using it, then it makes sense to add that to the mix. But that said, so back to Craig's question, firm fixed price contract, give low rates and cost amount using GSA Calc. Well, so firm fixed price, that's where, so it depends. And so if the contract is FFP and the government is allowing the contractors to figure out your own basis of estimate, how many FTEs, then the biggest cost driver is the FTE count as opposed to rates. And so you can probably have healthier rates with a firm fixed price contract that, again, you are determining the FTE count, as opposed to a fixed price deal where the government's determining the FTE count. Then in that case, it's more of a rate shootout because everyone's, has the same 50 FTEs that you're pricing. And so, I guess like I'm not that familiar with the GSA Calc, because I would work with clients of mine, and we'd build up your rates from scratch. We'd use salary survey data. We'd look at your indirect rates. We would add profit to it. I, might do some price to win analysis based on the size of the deal, but maybe I'll think about adding in a GSA Calc tool, since so many people seem to be using that tool as a comparison. I guess my comparisons are more based on my comparisons for different deals, and it's similar actually. Maybe I just don't use a tool, but say, for example, I have a deal and it's off of CIO SP3. Well, then I'll look at CIO SP3, other contractors who have awards under that vehicle. Maybe what it is that I haven't worked on that many GSA deals until recently. That's probably it. And again, part of that GSA tool, just know, and I know this from working on GSA schedules, that a lot of the veracity of the GSA tool will be how current are the rates that were put together that the GSA tool is capturing. Even if there's escalation involved, like for example, we had a big salary escalation, 2021, 22, salaries went up 8, 9, 10% in some cases. So if some GSA schedules, and they were developed in, say, 2016, and they ran through, for the next 10 years, they'll probably be escalated 3% per year. Well, that's not realistic anymore based on what happened in 21 and 22. So that's one more reason I'm not too crazy about the GSA tool. But again, it's a data point, and it's one that we can add to the mix.
Joel, can I just add something really quick? So for the GSA calc tool, it's not, your just easy answer to everything. To Joel's point, we have new career fields every day, especially in the last couple of years. We're doing, we've seen a lot of total experience, a lot of service design. So you have a lot of these new career fields. They're not new to everybody, but they're new to the government. Really, they're used to seeing engineers and PMs and, certain categories. And so I couldn't find any of those in calc because, to Joel's point, they're looking back at IDIQs that have been put in place for 5 to 10, sometimes 15 years, right, worth of data, and have not really been adjusted. So in those cases, like I've mentioned, I live in sole source world. So I actually write about it. I write about why this is unique, why it's different, what the salary data is showing, and I explain how all of my calculations are working. So that, to that point of the question that was asked that Joel was trying to answer, I would hope that each business is going through using salary data and then using their indirects to calculate what their fully burdened rate is. What is that that's going to cover all of your costs? Don't just use some rate that you see. Like, what is that? Now, if you see that your rate is in line with others, great. But if it's not, be prepared to explain that. But you don't want to just be putting rates out there that are not going to cover your costs. You can make sometimes those risky decisions if you are able to, and maybe you'll be able to find folks to fill it. We have a very challenging talent issue right now. So I'm just saying, be careful, about just going with rates that are too low. You should know exactly what your rate should be to cover folks in each of those positions. Does that make sense? Yeah.
If you do public work, okay, like for the state, and a lot of times your rates are published, right, in the proposals that you give. Are you locked into those published rates when you go after a pricing for an IDIQ? So
you're locked into the rates that is applicable to the thing that you have put the rates. So like if I bid on, I'm on an IDIQ for GSA, those rates will be applicable for that type of work because it's also in context to whatever that PWS is as well.
Okay.
So if somebody tries to tell, well, your GSA rate here, this is different work. They may both be PMs, but this PM is doing a different context of job. And so you may have to have different rates, for different things, even though they are the same, like, label. Does that make sense?
That answer.
Okay.
So and I've done quite a few GSA schedules. So when you're doing your GSA schedule and doing the rates, they want to see invoices and backup of where you've charged customers. So what they face, the rate that you're going to offer them, they want a discount off your most favorite customer. So wherever you've done given the best rate to, they're going to want to see a discount off of that rate when you go for a GSA schedule.
Okay. I have a problem with that. Yeah. In that, working for the government, is different than working for a private client.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's a more, you know, if I'm charging $100 an hour to a private client, the government wants a discount from that?
The government also
Yes,
gives you.
the government always wants a discount.
They give you the opportunity to use your price list. And if you use your commercial price list, then you get a government discount for that. So it doesn't have to necessarily be, you know, like from active PMs who are on the ground. On your commercial price list, you can mark it up, you know, 200% and give them a discount. Like that. So.
Yeah, and some people do take that tactic, you know, we see that all the time happening. Let's say, there's all kinds of things that are out there that are wildly expensive posted online. And then you buy more than one of those things and you get a big discount. You don't have to give a discount. They'll always ask for one. You don't have to give it though. Like your rate that's on that schedule, it just depends on the work and what risk you're willing to take to win the job, you know? But it's not always that. GSA is not the only thing out there. We have different rates for different circumstances, different contexts, different jobs. Just depends on what it is. Yep.
Back to you, Joel.
All right, great. So, yeah, lots of, I'm working on a couple of, as I mentioned, a couple of GSA deals right now, and yeah, definitely do all you can to have healthy rates on your GSA schedule. And one big note, please write this down. Make sure you include an escalation factor, an annual escalation factor on your GSA schedule. Because I'm working with one right now that has no escalation. It was written like 5 years ago. And so we need to keep those rates constant. And it's driving me a little bit nuts. And so, you know, GSA is one of those topics you can talk about forever, but we won't. And because there's lots of other contracts and opportunities out there except GSA. But no, I would say try to keep your rates on contract healthy, and an escalation rate per year is key. All right, next slide. So rate cards, I guess similar. We talked about a lot of these things already. Keepers and throwaways. Yeah, as a sub, haven't talked about this so much, subbing and priming. So as a sub, I would suggest just come in high with your rates and then wait for the targets to show up. You don't want to go in with low rates for the, you know, from the outset, because the prime will probably come back with targets. And if they don't, I guess maybe if they don't, and maybe the prime's not too swift, and you've given them a rate for a software engineer, and you've added like 30% profit to a healthy salary. Maybe towards the end you want to say, hey, you know what, you know, upon further review, maybe we want to work on that rate a little bit because we want to win this deal. But most primes are smart enough to see rates that are not competitive. But you don't want to come in as a sub with low rates as a starting point, and as they say, leave money on the table. And then as the prime for rate cards, as we talked about earlier, winners and losers, and have a handful of rates that are very healthy, even more healthy than usual. Like you want to have on any on any rate card, we used to say, but they're not so high anymore, to have a handful of rates over $200 an hour. But even 200 is not, you know, $200 an hour, that's pretty healthy. Just, you know, some math in my head, that would be like a $240,000 a year person with a decent set of indirect rates and 10 or 12% profit. So 200 is pretty good. 250 is even better, you know, for maybe like you want to for these SME rates, you might have some consultants and some SME technical experts come in for one of your deals, and they might charge $250, or some might even charge up to $300 an hour. So for these rate cards, try to have a couple of rates. Maybe I'll say today for the first time that $300 an hour is the new $200 an hour. To have a couple of rates at 300 to fit in anyone who crosses your doorstop for a bid. All right, next slide. What else are we talking about here? Sub-negotiations. Sub-negotiations. And so I think we talked about some of this with Mandy, but so as a prime, it depends. Yeah, so it depends on how important. So my 4 examples, a good one. And some people just spend way too much time on things that are not very important. And so, for example, say you have a sub, say you're priming a deal and you got a handful of subs, and one of them is has a 10% work share commitment in their teaming agreement. I know Mandy talked about teaming agreements. And so say they're coming in 10% over their target rates. Well, that kind of sounds like a lot, but if they're only 10%, like say you have a 20 person deal, and this sub has like two out of 20, 10%, and they're 10% over their targets. Well, doing some quick math, 10% of 10%, that 10% delta on their rates will only impact your overall bid like 1%. Now, I've never, I guess it happens, but I've never lost a deal by 1%. Some people probably have, but again, pick your spots on where to negotiate. As a sub, so what are we saying here? Yeah, how critical are you to the success of the proposal? Again, kind of take that same sub from above. A sub from above is a current commercial, isn't it? Be a sub from above. Anyway, who is that?
Josh Bisgard, DBS.
Jimmy John, huh?
It's Josh Bisgard from DBS, but it's I just said it. Oh my gosh. So Drinking Minds, thank you.
Jimmy John's, yeah, Jimmy John's. Anyway, so so take that sub at 10%. Now that sub might have the keys to the kingdom. They might have the 2 key SMEs for the deal, and they might be a small, and on top of that, they might have small business quals. And so you might have some rock stars, and you are key to the deal. Well, if that's the case, then I would not bend over backward to come in to meet or beat the prime's targets, because they need you, and you're important to them. And so otherwise, if, like, say you're not a small business, you're just kind of filling some roles, some spots, your buddy worked up the prime contractor, and he gave you 5 roles, but your input is not overly critical. Well, you should probably meet their targets, or you might get tossed off the team. So that makes sense. This depends on your criticality, and just kind of gauge it. And there's a lot of other things we can talk about there, but any questions on negotiations? We talked about some of that earlier. Mandy's probably shaking her head at I'm glossing over all this stuff, but I only have 20 minutes left, so.
Hey, did you talk about weighted guidelines earlier? I didn't. in negotiations?
So I haven't, I don't come across that a lot. If you want to take a minute to talk about that, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so weighted guidelines, this is primarily used by DoD, so you'll find it in the FAR, or DFAR, sorry. And so I would say for sole source, this is not really gonna be used for competitive, but the way that the COs and price analysts are trained, they're going to review your proposal and they're gonna look at your proposed percentage of profit or fee. And they are different, right? And so it depends on the contract type. And they will use that tool, the weighted guidelines tool, to assess. It's essentially looking at sort of the risk that you have involved, you know, how much you're financing something, how long the effort is, and the technical management risk of this project. It is then based on the total costs and all of these other little factors. It's going to produce a percentage that's going to tell the CO, this is what is fair for this job. So if you're proposing 15%, believe me, I've seen like way higher actually. But let's say you're proposing 15%. You decided that's what's fair. This is so crazy risky. I need 15%. Well, it's going to be really hard for their weighted guideline tool to come up with 15. Believe me, I know, unless you have some sort of tech incentive. So be prepared with the reasoning, and you can find that in the weighted guidelines section of the DFAR, and it's going to tell you when something is very complex, like, oh, low risk. Okay, they need to be able to answer this. They have to write this up in their file. So you being prepared and providing them those answers from the get-go is going to save you some headache later on, because you're going to answer the questions they're going to ask you eventually, right? It's going to save some time. You may need to negotiate, but I found that being able to just share exactly where we're coming from, answering the question on the risk piece is going to help you get what you're looking for. Because otherwise they're going to use their best guess of what they know about this to assess your risk for you. You might as well go ahead and help them answer it correctly, from your point of view, of course. And if they believe that it's wrong, you guys will have a negotiation. But I think that's going to prepare you, and you should know that that's what COs are trained to use to evaluate that. They're not just coming up with it out of nowhere. That's in sole source, of course, competition. You're looking at all kinds of things. And even in sole source, you're looking at other buys, you know, what were other people awarded, and, you know, how did you assess that? But standard, that is a decent rule of thumb. And that's what they're taught. So you might as well know it and use it.
And you would include that in the price narrative.
Quite frankly, I fill it out in my Excel sheet that I provide in my sole source proposals. I fill it out completely for them and provide all of the narrative. I know it's a little secret sauce, but that's what I do, and it helps. Because I
It
know that's
sounds
what
like
they're
for
looking for.
For all your weighted guideline needs, just to
For all your-
contact Mandy, All right, next slide. Lots of stuff here left. So yeah, a price to win, right? And so, yeah, this is like a whole half day, but basically, you know, it's funny. So what I'm saying here, and even as a even as someone who has dabbled in price to win and has done some price to win exercises, I'm saying that typically the price to win is the most technically competent bidder who bids a reasonable price. And so meaning that low price doesn't always win, as we know. And so even as a pricing guy, I'll always talk to my you know, clients and contractors I'm supporting and say, how's your tech volume? How's your management volume? How's your writing? Are you describing the solution in a winning way? And so, you know, for those who were here for Rich's presentation a week ago, the key, I mean, even again, as a pricing guy, price is not the most important typically, as long as your price is reasonable. And so it's amazing to me how many millions and maybe billions of dollars are spent on price to wins. And, they're important based on the size of the deal, but don't blow the budget on price to win and discount your technical solution, graphics, how the proposal looks, management volume, key personnel resumes, all that stuff's important. And I guess Rich will give me like, $5 after this presentation. I'm talking about all the things that he and the folks on his team can help you with. And so, yeah, and I say that here, technical and management, make sure that they're also up to snuff. And yeah, certain things, certain companies out there sell wrap rates. I would never buy. I know a company was selling a contractor I was supporting, selling wrap rates for like $3,000 a piece. I just wouldn't do it. Number one, every wrap rate seemed to be about the same, which doesn't make any sense. And in companies' wrap rates, I guess they don't change on a dime, but companies could have different cost centers and develop different cost pools. And so I would not trade in wrap rates. Anyone tries to sell you a wrap rate, and I'm sorry for those who might be on the call who sell wrap rates. I don't think anyone probably does, but it's not worth it. And so I say here at the end, as far as for larger bids, and I'm saying DoD, but I guess other bids as well. Some of in with well-known competitors. And so, for example, yeah, for those bids, like say it's a big Army bid. It's a big Army bid and all the big guys are going after it, GDIT, SAIC, etc. Well, those companies are very well known. And so their rates are probably easier to find or locate. And so there's more available data on these companies, because any price to win is only as good as your data and how much stuff are you making up and how much do you know. And so that's also key. And for some of these smaller deals, it would be helpful. We talked about GSA schedules earlier. For smaller deals where you're going after, some opportunity, and that your competitors might be 2 or 3 or 4 small businesses that might have gone to the bidders conference. Well, if they have a GSA schedule, that's at least one data point. Now we talked about GSA schedules. Maybe the schedules, a schedule was written 5 years ago, but it's better than nothing. And so to kind of do some analysis or at least try to find some intel on your competitors, you don't need to hire a price to win consultant to do that. Pretty simple to do that on your own, and at least get some kind of a data point on where your bid might fall. And again, I'll say it again though, that I think in many cases I supported a large contractor, and I'll say who it was. It was Peraton. I was Peraton's director of pricing strategy for a number of years, and we won a few or lost a few, and those bids that for them or other contractors, we lost deals, not necessarily on price. And so it's kind of why I talk about the other volumes and make sure you have a good solution and have the customer intimacy don't start the bid too late. Don't, catch wind of an RP that just came out and it's due in 2 weeks and try to bid on it. You probably won't win. But anyway, so any questions on that very high level look at price to win?
Oh, Joel, I was just gonna add, there's some companies, I know some of the bigs that provide like Deltec and Uninet, and they'll provide some market data or gauge report that gives some indicators of where wrap rates are based on some basics, small business versus large, defense versus other industries. So there are some out there that are available that are either included in your software package, that you pay for, or you could buy separately. So just it's a tool, a resource out there if people are interested.
No, that's a good point. And I would say, without, not sharing any secrets, but, and I don't think it's really changing a lot. Like as far as like a middle of the road wrap rate nowadays is, I'd say, like 1.6 or 1.7, and maybe I don't think I talk about this on any slides. So a wrap rate, for those who don't know what a wrap rate is, it is just your combination of your fringe, overhead, and G&A costs. And so for most companies, your fringe, which is your medical and your dental and vacation time and holidays, are typically 30 to 35%, sometimes 40% of your direct labor. Overhead and G&A fluctuate wildly, but I've seen overhead rates and G&A, like G&A is your CEO and your human resources team and your accountant and your lawyer. Overhead are costs that are not directly attributable to any one program. Like maybe it's a program manager who might oversee 4 or 5 programs. He would charge overhead versus direct. So overhead rates can be 2% to 20%. G&A rates can be 2 or 3% to 20% as well. But that wrap rate, that combination of G&A and overhead and G&A overhead and fringe. So take all those costs combined, to be kind of like in the middle, run about 60% on top of your direct labor. So say your direct labor rate, say somebody makes $100,000 a year, say it'd be like a mid-level application developer, and his salary is $100,000. Well, that from memory is $48.02 per year. And so a wrap rate of that 60% wrap rate would be like another $24 or so on top of the 48. And then you add profit to that to kind of come to your bill rate. But so like a 60% wrap is about middle of the road. I've seen them 40 to 50%, as high as another 100% on top. So some company has a 1.9. You'll hear so-and-so has a 1.9 wrap. Somebody has a 1.4 wrap. That 1.9 wrap means the 1 is the direct labor. The 0.9 is another 90% of indirect costs. And so I'm saying that 1.6, which is another 60% of indirect costs, is somewhere in the middle of the road. That makes sense? Too many numbers?
Does anybody want me to draw it out? Like, I'm not kidding. I can draw out how to calculate.
Yes,
I'll do it. Okay. Keep talking. Noel. Can I just draw it?
please.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
All right, I'll keep going.
Yep, keep going.
Next slide. So this is salary survey data. Is this my last slide, Jim?
Got one more, I think.
Is that just saying thank you or something, or?
You got this one and then basis of estimate guidance.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. I don't want to take too much more time. All right, all right. So salary survey data. Couple of choices out there. You know, as far as if you're on a if you're on a budget, there are some free ones. I have not used a free survey data in a while. I think maybe is it what pay? What is it? Not pay scales. What is the free survey data online called? Anybody know?
Salary.com.
Yeah, salaries.com, right. I've not used that in a long time. There's lots of ads. It's kind of hard to use. You did not hear this from me, but maybe you could like team up with a buddy or two. And, you know, I'm not saying you can share some of these subscriptions because you're not supposed to, but I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. And but ERI is what I use typically. It's pretty good for most types of
Government also uses ERI as well, so
Right,
they will
correct.
trust that tool.
Yeah.
ERI.
So
ERI, Economic Research Institute.
right, and so it's a very well-known DCAA knows ERI well, and so it's not that expensive based on some of the other ones, about $4 grand a year. And again, you're not supposed to share, you know, a subscription, but I'll leave it at that. So, but I will say, and what's important with salary survey data, then I'll move on to BOE. Not to have you guys not drinking your beer for much longer.
All right.
But know where your survey data comes from. Like, for example, ERI is, it comes from people in the roles today and then what they're paid today. So meaning if like ERI has a software engineer mid-level and it says their average salary is $110,000 a year, that's based on real life software engineers who have that job today and are making 110 grand a year, as opposed to salary.com, which I can see why the data comes this way because it's free, is that they'll aggregate want ads among other things, but it's basically it'll be what employers are willing to advertise as the pay for, in this case, a software engineer. So there might be ads for software engineers for $100,000 a year because the company wants to be economical, and then during negotiations, that same person winds up with 110. So what I'm saying is that on salary.com, the salary might be 100 grand for that same level position. ERI is 110. So just like no, and that's okay to use salary.com, but know where the data is coming from and what it represents. Very important. And but I would definitely get your hands on some salary data, especially ERI. It's by region. You have a deal in Washington, DC. I guess nowadays so much is remote. But you know, they have US average rates, or if it's Washington, DC or someplace in California, it's all by region. HR3D is not as searchable. It's okay, it's more expensive. But if there are questions on survey data, you can always call me or email me after this as well. All right, last slide. BOEs, oh, we saved the best to last. I think we talked about a lot of this stuff already. And I talked about how important BOEs are, especially for these fixed price deals where the contractor is developing the staffing plan. And is it 30 FTEs? Is it 60? Is it 90? As you can tell, if it's 30 versus 90, it's a huge difference in price. You know, rate differences by looking at salary survey data. And if you use salary.com for that software engineer, well, it's 100 grand, ERI is 110. Well, that swing is 10%. Your swing could be 50% or more with BOEs. And so very important to get those right, or if not right, at least well supported. That's the key, is to well support your BOE for those deals that require them. And sometimes there's like a middle of the road BOE. Like I think I have it in here that the government says that total hours for this effort, like at the bottom of my first bullet here, are you got 376,000 hours, but they don't say the exact labor categories and staffing mix. Well, that's still a BOE that has to be developed. They're just trying to level the playing field so that, to my analysis or my thoughts of one company is going to bid 90 FTEs a year and one's going to bid 30. The government doesn't want that because it's just too difficult to evaluate something like that. So they'll kind of give a bottom line number of how many total hours they are okay with your bidding, but then you guys got to figure out the staffing mix. So that's similar. You need to justify the labor categories and the hours per labor category very, very well. I'm looking at my bullets here. Yeah, again, just make sure you have good rationale and to do that, a good solution architect, definitely someone technical based on the opportunity, but don't try to have like your CFO figure out how many application developers you need for this deal and how many software engineers. You know, definitely have someone who knows how to put a deal together, and every deal is different. And so I could probably be the solution architect for a help desk deal. That's not too difficult. Is it 7 by 24? How many tickets? You know, how long does it take to solve a problem? Some things like that are easier to figure out than, say, standing up a new data center that may have 300 FTEs. And so definitely spend the money on your solution architects when you need a BOE. Very important. And also, you know, again, the writing, there are consultants out there who do nothing but write BOEs all day, and they're very good at it. And so based on the value of your deal, don't be shy in getting some outside help there as well. Any questions on BOEs right now?
No.
Everyone's ready for a beer, including me. And so does Mandy have some calculations for us in a minute or less?
Yeah.
Do you guys want me to walk through it really quick? Would that be helpful? Okay, so just like Joel shared, you have, and replace these with your own, of course, these are just bogeys. You want to move the whiteboard?
I don't know how I can, maybe Joel Bill's.
Okay, so you have whatever numbers, Joel had mentioned 30, I just put in some numbers here. You're gonna know these based on your own internal calculations, based on the support that goes into each of these pools. So 30%, 15, 10. Those are my made up numbers right now. To calculate your wrap rate, like he said, is gonna give you your rate that you will use to apply to your direct salary number to come up with, well, almost your fully burdened rate. So it's 1.3, so 30%, 1.3 times 1.15, that 15% times that 1.10, so that's 10%. And then of course you change those based on what these are. That gives me my wrap rate. So I'm at a 1.64, which Joel said would be middle of the road. Okay, so that's just covering these indirect costs. To come up with your fully burdened rate, so you have a salary. There are some little nuances here, right? You're taking all the hours available. This is what you're gonna pay somebody. That's what they get paid on holidays and everything. Some of those costs are covered in your rent or your overhead, depending on where you put them. So probably getting off on a tangent here, but you get this number, $48.07. That's the direct labor cost. So if you were to just say to the government, yep, I just need $48, you're not covering all of these costs. This is doing yourself a huge service, and you're probably not gonna be in business very long, I would imagine. So you have this up, so you can see where it flows to, 4807. Now you multiply this by your calculated wrap rate, right? So now you have, this is gonna cover your salary, and then it's gonna cover your overhead or indirect costs. That's this number. Then to make it fully burdened, so something that you're gonna now propose to GSA, let's say, you wanna include profit. So whatever that number is that you deem reasonable. And so I just used 10% just to make it a little easier. And so I'm gonna add that, and now, and I use 1.1, however you wanna calculate that. If you wanna just take 10%, add it. This just makes it easy for me to use my calculator. And now I have a rate of $86.72 that will cover all my costs, give me a little profit, and is appropriate for me, for my business. Of course, you might go to Calc and you might go to GSA and do some comparisons to make sure that you're in line with others. But this is at least gonna cover you. Does that make sense to everybody?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you multiplying across in the upper right, where you say fringe, for example, is it 1.3 times 100,000?
No.
And 1.15 times 130,000? Or is it 1.15 times 100,000?
I just, no, you don't worry about the 100,000. You just know these three numbers. So I know what my rate is for each of these categories.
Yeah,
I use, so one is,
what's the one?
the one is, well, how do I describe
The
it?
salary?
No, the one is
Well,
essentially.
one is the direct labor.
In terms of like using it in the calculation, I don't know exactly how to explain what the one is. It's like.
Well, I just,
it
well,
was
I'm,
multiplied, I think, by 100 or
hey,
something.
Mandy.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm explaining it.
Oh,
And
yeah, go ahead.
So say, for example, so your wrap rate of, what is your wrap rate right now up there?
1.64.
Okay, 1.64, the one is your direct labor rate. And so, for example, say that same mid-level software engineer makes $100,000 a year. Well, you divide 100,000 by 2080, and if my memory is right, that's like $48.02. But say it's like $50. So that $50 is the one. Okay. And then if Mandy's wrap rate, say it's 1.6, all right, and then take $50 times 1.6, then your fully burdened rate will be $80.
Right. So then the question, the answer to my question is that the one equals the hourly salary.
Yes.
On 28 hour a year.
Yes, that
Yeah, so
48.7 cents is.
essentially.
So you could, I think, do the same calculation. If you take out the ones, you're gonna get probably 64%, 0.64. You could do, what is 64% of this, and then do an extra step and add it. We're taking that step out by doing it this way. And if you recognize it this way, this is how industry is gonna recognize it. They're not gonna look at 64, they're gonna look at 1.64. You know, you're looking at that range, so. I'm not a like math whiz. I
Well, I
know
would
how to
say,
do these
so-
things, but I
So
don't.
Mandy,
Yes.
Mandy. So the government, at least the agencies I work with, they don't talk about wrap rates. They talk about your indirect rates, separate from your direct labor, separate from profit. They don't talk about wrap rates. Wrap rates are kind of talked about amongst contractors more than government agencies.
Well, you know, granted, when I used it was on very large procurements, $1 billion and above, to do some very large calculations. And so we did do it, but, yeah, I think it's a lot more, we're gonna talk about a lot more on the industry side for sure, especially when we're comparing ourselves, you know, trying to make sure that we're fitting, you know, if this number was coming out to 2.4, that's a little chunky, right? You're probably not gonna be in a very good competitive posture. But if you're in sole source world and they look at your numbers, your cost type contract, that might be okay. You know, it just depends, because if you've got an approved accounting system and the salary figures are reasonable, then that is something that could fly. I've seen it happen. So just know it all kind of depends, but if you're living in a competitive world, it's good to know what these mean and how to use them. So sorry, no, it's not perfect, but it's just straight out of my brain onto this thing. Just try to do a quick calculation for you.
Someone, all right, great, thanks, Mandy. Somebody asked about Bureau of Labor Stats, BLS, and I'll add to that, wage determinations. Those are two good sources of wage and escalation data as well. Bureau of Labor Stats and wage determinations. And, you know, there's a lot of information that's kind of been thrown around here. And so any questions, you could always ask me or Mandy offline. There's my email, and pleasure to speak with everyone today. And hope everyone enjoys happy hour, and any, you know, questions for me, let me know. And again, happy to you know, always share knowledge. And there's a lot to every one of these topics. There's so much to every one of these topics. And I guess if it were easy, then you would not need people like Mandy and myself and Rich. And so the government makes it easy for us to stay employed and to help folks like you. So with that, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Don't forget happy hour.